Welcome to this introductory video tutorial series on 3D reconstructing historical architecture based on archival data. This series was specifically made for the purpose of teaching 3D modeling techniques at the University of Amsterdam, but uploaded to YouTube for the general good. As regards to the software that I'm using Blender 4.5 LTS. So in August 2025, this is the most recent release of this 3D modeling software. But in other videos in the same series, I'm using also Blender 3.6 LTS. And some of the techniques that I'm explaining there are a little bit outdated. So be mindful of that. In this first video, we are going to discuss the general approach to modeling. That includes setting up your Blender file, how to deal with archival data in Blender, and how to start modeling. So the first thing that you should do is find and collect the historical data that you're going to use to base your 3D reconstruction on. In this case, we're using data from the Amsterdam City Archives on historical buildings. So we have a historical architectural drawing here with plan, side views and cross sections of a building. And of the same building we also have a historical photograph. This one dating to May 1928 and this one dating to the late 19th century. The next step would be to import the data that you have collected in Blender so you can use it as a reference for modeling. I've created a separate video on importing and scaling architectural drawings in Blender, such as this one. As you can see, I've placed this in the middle of my 3D viewport so I can conveniently use it to start modeling. As regards to other image data, such as this historical photograph, I could of course try to find the original perspective from which this photo was taken and place that also in the 3D viewport, but that is not always really necessary in order to make your reconstructions. So in this case, I've chosen the easier option to display it next to my 3D modeling window. To demonstrate how this is done, I will start with a fresh Blender file. So this is what Blender looks like for you as well when you just start it up. So in order to make subdivisions or create additional windows or panels, you can go to the corner of any Blender window and your mouse cursor will become a small cross, and then you can click and start dragging. And when I release, this has become a separate window. So in order to make this window not a second 3D viewing window, I can go to the top left corner, click on this button and select Image Editor as the function of this window. So now this is an empty image editor. To fill it with an image, I simply have to go to Open and navigate to where I store the image. This is the one that I want to display here. Double click it and it's here. I can always narrow this again when I want to focus on modeling or get it back. I can even entirely remove this new panel by clicking on the right one and then dragging to the left. Now the image panel is gone. So I can get it back in the same process that I demonstrated before. And now I don't have to click Open because the image is still stored in my Blender file. So I go here, browse an image, there it is. Another very useful application of the second window that we've just created is to use it as a text editor. The text editor is actually meant to be used for scripting in Blender, but in our case we can also use it to write down our notes about our modeling project. Clearly it has its limitations in terms of formatting, but the big advantage is that we don't have to switch to other software while we are modeling in Blender, so we can still look at our model at the same time as making our nodes. And a second advantage is that this file is attached to the Blender file. It's inside the Blender file. So for anyone opening this project in the future, that person will be able to read about how this model was actually created. Another important aspect of 3D modeling historical architecture or any kind of 3D modeling project is scene organization. So for this we turn to the right over here, and this window is called the outliner. Here I have different collections in which I can store different parts of my model, or different parts of my modeling process. And for historical architecture, it's often useful to create a separate collection for the sources, so the source data that you're using. One for the reconstruction, so the model that you will be creating, and one for helper objects, so object that you use in the process, but you do not actually want to display as part of your 3D reconstruction. So in this case, a scale bar that I've used to scale this image. So to create a new collection, I simply right click here and click new collection. New collection will be created for me. I double click and I rename it. Other collections that you may think of are, for instance, when you want to render the scene, that you create one separate collection for camera, one separate collection for light. But you can also think of creating sub-collections. For instance, the reconstruction collection will become very big with all kinds of different model parts. So I can consider creating sub-collections here. So for instance, one for roof and one collection for ground floor, and put all the models related to ground floor in that collection. So this is how you keep your scene clear and organized, not only for yourself, but also for others viewing this modeling project. So all the objects that are present in your 3D modeling window are also represented here in the outliner. So for instance, when I click on this object, the roof, you can see it's also highlighted in the outliner. And conversely, when I click on an object in the outliner, it is also highlighted in the 3D modeling view. I can temporarily hide objects by clicking on the eye. This one. And the shortcut for this is H. So H on your keyboard quickly hides an selected object, and Alt H to get it back. I can also use the same technique to hide and view entire collections by clicking on the same icon behind the collection. So now I don't see the sources anymore, and now I do see them again. So the final thing that you should do before you actually start to model is to very closely study the source data, so the images that you collected, because this will determine your general modeling strategy. There are some important choices that you have to make based on studying the historical data that you have. So when looking at an architectural drawing like this, a couple of things become clear about the structure of this building. There are some structural divisions in this building. There is a roof here. There are upper floors that are all quite similar in construction. And then there is the ground floor with its shopping front, with a very special construction made of wood. So when modeling architecture, it is smart to keep to these structural divisions of the building itself. So when making a very rough division, you would create 3 base models, one for the roof, one for the upper floor walls, and one for the ground floor shopping front. So this is exactly what I've done. So I'll hide the sources for now. I've created a ground floor model, an upper floor model, and a roof model. Of course, the model isn't finished like this. You'd like to add a little bit more detail. So there are roughly 2 approaches to this. So I can modify these individual objects. So for instance, this object, I can create details such as this one. And now this object has a big gap. What I can also do instead is to add this detail by creating additional objects. So for instance, this ground floor storefront, I will first remove part of the base object with the wall, and then I can add additional. So I create another cube here, and I start modeling with this cube. So this is a very rough way of starting to model the framework for the storefront. So I've created a new model for this, of course, and when it's created, it is created in the sort of the master collection, the collection of collections, with a default name cube. I will quickly rename this to storefront frame, and then move it to the appropriate collection. So this is part of the ground floor, and I will also move the ground floor, and then I will rename this to ground floor walls. So I now have 2 objects in the ground floor collection, one of the frame and one of the walls. And with that, we come to an end of the first video discussing the general approach to modeling and the setup of the Blender project file.